Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Do you know her? Never saw her before.
Thank you for coming, Mrs. Foster. I know what an inconvenience it was, and what an ordeal it will be. Are you married?
I was.
Is your husband deceased?
No, we're divorced.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Divorce is a devastating and often needless way to solve certain difficulties. Can you tell us why it happened?
My husband was a rather well-known and accomplished chaser.
You mean he saw other women while married to you?
Oh, he was discreet, but persistent.
Your Honor, this is simply not germane to the issue of competency.
Mr. Green, Mr. Cord, your witnesses thus far have testified directly to the issue at hand.
Well, so does Mrs. Foster, Your Honor.
Mr. Jordan testified to Mr. Peyton's forgetfulness at the cemetery. Mr. Kennerly himself has testified as to the wills. I must ask that all testimony relate directly to competency.
I'm building a line, Your Honor.
Proceed, Mr. Cord.
You stated that your husband saw other women while married to you. Mrs. Foster, what did you do about that?
Well, when I'd finally had enough of it, after 17 years, I decided to get a divorce, but Charles just wouldn't hear of it. He was content with his life. He could pursue his hobby without having to worry about any lasting entanglements. You see, Charles was a connoisseur with a very large appetite.
What did you do?
Decided to feed that appetite with a concoction he couldn't resist.
In other words, you hired someone to compromise your husband in order for you to obtain your divorce.
And to obtain a settlement. At the rate of $1 in infidelity, I'd be a very rich woman.
How did you find this person?
Through a private detective agency.
Is that person you hired present in this courtroom?
Yes, she is.
Would you point her out?
There she is. That's the woman.
Let the record show that the witness indicated Adrienne Van Leyden.
Only then her name was Howland.
What happened?
She agreed, and then decided to play both sides of the street.
Can you explain that?
Oh, with pleasure. She knew a good thing when she found one. She bled my husband dry while telling me that he suspected something, that she needed more time and more money.
You mean she lied to you?
She lied to both of us, over and over, until he had nothing, and I had less. She then coerced him into a final payment that sent him into bankruptcy. I was left with a broken man and a mountain of debts. I finally got out from under 2 years later. I went to work.
Corroboration, Your Honor.
Witness is excused.
Thank you, Mrs. Foster. Call Adrienne Van Leyden to the stand.
Adrienne Van Leyden, please take the stand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
What are you doing in Peyton Place, Mrs. Van Leyden?
I believe you already know that, Mr. Cord.
Refresh my memory.
I'm engaged to Martin Peyton.
Were you engaged before you arrived here?
No.
Well, then what brought you?
Mr. Peyton graciously asked me to be his house guest. My husband and he were friends.
Oh, well, then it wasn't love at first sight.
Let's drop the sarcasm, Counselor.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. How much did he pay you to become his fiancée?
Mr. Cord, I've warned you about that type of question.
Your Honor, I fail to see the relevancy in this line of questioning.
That makes two of us. Care to let us in on it, Mr. Cord?
I intend to establish, Your Honor, that Mrs. Van Leyden was brought here by Martin Peyton for the express purpose of destroying my marriage, so that he could carry out the provisions of his bizarre, eccentric, amoral will, namely the marriage of my wife to his grandson, Rodney Harrington.
My objection stands, Your Honor.
I'm going to give you a little more rope, Mr. Cord, but if you've got a point, I suggest you make it. Objection denied.
How would you describe yourself, Mrs. Van Leyden?
I'm a housewife.
Before that,
Various things.
would you please be more specific?
Well, when I was 5, I started kindergarten, and then I went to first grade.
Does the name Richie Tager mean anything to you?
No, not offhand.
I have a photostatic copy of a private detective agency's report on Mr. Tager and his business associates.
Stephen.
Would you please read the name I've underlined?
Adrienne Howland.
Well, isn't that a coincidence? You both have the same first name. What was your maiden name, Mrs. Van Leyden?
Howland.
Exactly what was your business with Mr. Tager?
We were just friends.
So friendly that he paid the rent on your $450 a month apartment?
No,
I have photostats of the rent receipts, Mrs. Van Leyden.
it was a loan.
Yes, I can imagine how you paid it back.
Strike that.
Wasn't Richie Tager one of New York's foremost suppliers of party girls? And weren't you one of his most expensive commodities?
Objection.
Sustained.
Did you go to many parties while you were in New York, Mrs. Van Leyden?
A few.
Did you go to one where another of Mr. Tager's business associates took an overdose of drugs and wound up in the morgue?
I don't remember.
She was 19 years old, Mrs. Van Leyden. I wouldn't enjoy having to read the police report on that party.
Wouldn't you, Stephen?
Didn't Richie Tager set you up in business?
Objection.
As a professional in the play for pay set?
Your Honor, the witness is not on trial here. The purpose of this hearing is to determine the competency of my client.
Your client hired this woman to destroy my marriage.
Mr. Cord, you have a very loud voice, but so far you haven't reached me.
I contend that the only difference between a party girl who takes $100 for the powder room and a woman who takes a $10,000 bracelet from a senile old man is the price.
Those are very serious charges.
Well, I believe I have corroborated them, Your Honor. I'll put the question to Mrs. Van Leyden. Did Martin Peyton hire you to break up my marriage?
No, he did not.
Did anyone hire you to break up a marriage?
Strike that. The witness will disregard the question.
Thank you, Mrs. Van Leyden. You've been very helpful.
The witness may step down.
Stay where you are, Adrienne.
Mr. Peyton.
Stay where you are. I knew of my fiancée's background. So did her late husband. He was a revered and distinguished scientist. He gave her the means to start our new life. And I intend to continue those means.
Mr. Peyton, please.
Look to yourself, Stephen Cord. Look to the folly of your own life. Then cast the first stone. Or are you too busy trying to get your hands on my money with this circus? Well, do you have an answer? Or are you ashamed to give one?
Is that your case, Mr. Cord?
That's my case.
The witness may step down. Case dismissed.
preview from the continuing story of Peyton Place.
How much proof do you need? I'll find you a dozen witnesses.
If you find me 10 dozen, I won't change my mind, Steve.
You have got to believe me.
Who do you think I am? Some cheap bum like Jack Chandler?
You know your way around, Eddie. You could do it and never be suspected. All you have to do is marry me and outlive me. Then you'll be a young widow for the second time. This time, a rich one.